Welcome to another episode of The Local Dive. This is Alex Scott, joined by Ashlyn Portero and Dean and Sarah. How we doing?
Hello. Doing
hello.
good. Doing well, sorry.
Doing well? Doing good.
Doing well and doing good. It's catching on.
Dean is about to be refreshed and hydrated.
That's right.
Limoncello.
Dude, that's a great
LaCroix.
great LaCroix flavor.
It is.
Good
It's
stuff.
significantly better than lemon. LaCroix.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, which is also good, but
Debatable, but
Ashlyn has the cherry lime one that comes in the skinny can or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
how do
Very
we
good
think
flavor.
we say? I mean, limon, I think I got,
I think
which
it's
is lime.
cerise
Cerise limon.
or cerise. Not sure.
I don't know. Somebody who's French
It's-
Oh, Yeah, that's Greek for quit trying so hard.
That's true. Oh my gosh.
Well,
Okay,
anyways.
Mr. Limoncello.
Yo!
He also has a bubbly that's just lime.
Right.
So, he's keeping it. Common folks and the
There you
snooty pinky up people.
I'm definitely elitist.
But also,
do y'all think I'm elitist in
l-
general?
love the mainstream.
I don't. How are we defining elitist?
I got called that on social media a couple weeks ago, so I was wondering if you think I am.
Well, if it was on social media, then it's probably true.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
No, I
Plus,
don't
if
know.
you say you are, you're just living your truth in 2020.
live my truth.
Yeah. Live your values. All right. Well, this episode is coming out post 2020 election cycle. And if you're listening to this, that means the world is still spinning. And if you have really big fears about things that are going on with politics, I'd suggest you go back and listen to last week's episode and give it all to the Lord. But we're excited to jump in today. So, November is upon us. That means that Christmas is basically here. And we're going to jump into the shallow end, talking about when it's appropriate to celebrate Christmas and all that goes with that. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time in the deep dive, or a lot of time in the deep dive, talking about how we think about and plan the corporate gathering of the church. And then we'll talk about our favorite local holiday tradition as we enter that season. So as we dive into the shallow end, don't dive into the shallow end. That's a really bad recipe. As we wade into the shallow end, when is the right time to start celebrating Christmas?
I am pretty traditional, end of Thanksgiving Day is generally when I'm fire up the Christmas Carol, Pandora, or whatever.
Put the Yule log
I don't have a
screensaver.
fireplace, sadly. Yeah, so on my TV, the Yule log. Producer Jacob knows this. I've recently gotten into ambient worlds, so I'll probably have some type of ambient sound image on my TV. That's
Ambient world sounds like some strange Netflix show.
It does. Anyways, that's a different podcast for a different day. So yeah, day of Thanksgiving is, but 2020, I kind of feel like all bets are off. You can just.
So music, decorations,
Yeah.
everything goes up
Yeah.
post Thanksgiving.
I usually get my tree the day after Thanksgiving.
Fair. Dean?
Well, yeah, I wanted to show where I stand and refute you out of the gate when you said November is here, which means Christmas is upon us. I want to file 3 woe skippies and 2 settle downs.
I'll give the turkey a chance.
I thank you. That's my dad used to always say, give the turkey a chance. This is not very fun that I'm in complete sync with Ashlyn on this, but I am Thanksgiving Day. Now, technically, it's after Santa comes down on the Macy's parade.
So,
But I would rather be stabbed in the left pinky toe than watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day production or Broadway show. It's not even a parade anymore.
Yeah.
On TV. But that technically is supposed to be when it actually begins, the Christmas season. For me, it's after Thanksgiving dinner. When we're done, you've had your pies, Christmas time.
Okay.
So I want Yule log. I'm Christmas music nonstop. I want to get a Dorothy B. Oven Park in Tallahassee where the lights are that night, Thanksgiving night, to kick it off, and get our tree that weekend.
Okay. See, I would say that Santa coming down Woodward Avenue in the Detroit Thanksgiving Day parade is when it really begins.
Oh my
but,
gosh.
I'm not an elitist, okay? So I don't hang out in New York.
That's
So
good.
I used to be very staunch Thanksgiving. You cannot. So one of my roommates in college would listen to Christmas music in July, and I didn't kind of year round. I was like, what are you doing? This is for a certain season. There's about a month window where this is acceptable. And lately, and not just 2020, but I'm just kind of whatever, let it rip. If you want to be in the Christmas spirit all year round, go for
Now,
it.
see, Christmas songs in July is too much for me. I can't. I'm not
Deep
in,
compromise, in my opinion. You've
I'm-
convictions.
Yeah, I'm not in the spirit at that time. But I mean, I'm in the spirit, but I'm not in the Christmas spirit. Let me clarify that. I mean, Jesus juke myself. But I also think it makes a difference. So normally I host Thanksgiving at my
Okay.
house. And so to me, it feels very weird to like already have my tree up and my Christmas decorations out when I'm like trying to make a great, nice Thanksgiving dinner for people. So that is a little like, I think that's part of where my bias comes from. But if I was going like away for Thanksgiving or something, then maybe I would say, yeah, I'll get everything set up beforehand so that, but like I said, I mean, I went into Lowe's the other day and it like everything is already Christmas. Target's getting there, like all the stores are already getting it, which I mean,
That's what I meant by Christmas is
At the
upon
time
us.
of this
Yeah,
recording,
it
we
is
haven't even
upon
trick or
us.
treated yet.
the people need Christmas, okay?
Mercy.
Hey, Hobby Lobby allegedly leaves a Christmas tree up all year round.
So does Karen
Oh.
Knox.
So, see,
Define for the listener, or say for listeners who Karen Knox is.
Karen Knox is one of my great family friends. She actually led me to Jesus when I was 13 years old. And she has a Christmas tree. She thinks we should celebrate Christ coming all year long. So she has a Christmas tree in her living room all year long, fully
There you go.
decorated.
that's awesome. And she doesn't live in Wakulla.
She does not. She doesn't want to solo. It's like next up.
Oh my gosh.
Okay,
Yeah.
so sort of on the same. I mean, you guys have mentioned getting your tree shortly after Thanksgiving, which is usually when we acquire our real tree. We've probably put up an artificial tree or two before that point. What is the tree count in your house? Is it just one? Is there lots of trees?
I'm one real tree, but it gets bigger every year.
So Clark Griswold is getting your tree this year?
Yeah, my house was built in 1973, so I have like the 8-foot ceilings. So last year, I think I maxed out at a 7-foot tree. Plus also like I'm 5'1", that's about as much as I can handle like dragging into my house by myself. So we're starting to need assistance here. So we might be back down to a 6-footer this year. But yeah, I'm just one tree.
Well, my parents are like 5 or 6, I think,
Yeah.
now. I want to say we have 3. We bought a fake tree last year, which in my family I thought was going to be very controversial because my parents were like super Christmas purists, like really probably the best indoor decorated house in north side of Tallahassee on Christmas. And once my sister Sally got a fake tree, it was like green light for us to do it. Because if Sally can do it and it be clear, then we can do it.
So this is like a family approval process kind of a thing.
Like unofficially. So it was
Got
like
it.
I came home, I was like, Sally got a fake tree.
But are all of your mom's trees real?
The unless they just got fake, maybe Sally started the trend. They collect ornaments.
Yeah.
Like they're all year round. They don't display them year round. They collect them. So they have like one tree that's like this series of ornaments, another tree that's like this series of ornaments. I think the big tree in the middle of the house, like the big tree, is real. It always has been, unless that changed last year. So we tread it very lightly. Thought we'd get judged by our family, but once Sal got the tree, it was like we just got unofficial permission to get a fake tree
So you're 3 artificial trees.
in our house. Yes.
Yeah, wow. All right. Yeah, we are. I think we jump between 2 and 3, and the first couple years we were living in our house where we put our tree, like only we could see it. No one could see it from the road, and so Melissa was like, "I think people think we're the Grinch." So she's like, "We've got to have a tree in the dining room, in the window that everybody can see." And then it was like, "Well, we have a tree there, and we have a tree here, but we need a tree there." And then now that we're about to have a baby, I'm sure he'll have a tree in his room, and it'll just we're gonna be like
I love it.
exploding Christmas trees.
Our own
soon.
bedroom tree. Mercy.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So we have a Disney tree. So one of our 3 trees is a Disney tree, and I can't remember what the other is. I think it's just like another random tree.
yeah. Okay, what's your favorite Christmas ornament?
So I like anything that we go out of town and get an ornament from that place. So on our tree, you have like Asheville, North Carolina ornament all the way to like Boston to wherever. So that's what I like, is those ones like where we go, oh, we got that at. So you kind of remember. Actually, one of my parents' trees is all the ornaments they've gotten when they've traveled.
Out of town. That's cool.
Yeah, one of their 47 trees or whatever. 47 is my exaggeration number, always.
But it's like 7.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, those kind. And then you get the little ones that have like the kids, a whole family painted on it. It's like our names on it. Those kind of stuff are cool.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know if I it would take me a minute to think about favorite ornament. But I don't do like a theme. I always tell myself I'm going to, but then I pull out all my ornaments and I'm like, but I love all of these and I want them all on the tree, which is why I should probably get another tree to then have a theme tree. I don't know. I will say like a cool recent ornament. So Lemoyne, which is an art gallery in town, they do like a kind of holiday festival, and every year the whole gallery is filled with Christmas trees. Alex, I think I saw your mom there last year.
She volunteers at Lemoyne.
Okay, I was like, I know I've seen Pat Scott.
I have received multiple Lemoyne ornaments as gifts.
Yes, but it's really cool because so they fill all of the rooms of the gallery with Christmas trees with ornaments, and they're all like locally made. And so they're, local artists in like Florida and probably outside of Florida too, but some are handmade. I guess maybe they're all handmade. I don't know. But anyways, I bought several ornaments last year. I went with a friend, and 2 of them I actually got from one of our church members, Vanessa, who does like hand poured like painting.
Yeah.
And so she made Christmas ornaments out of like her designs. And so it was really cool because now like when I hang different things on my tree, I'm like, these are local Tallahassee artists and also even church members. So that's
cool.
Fun highlight. Yeah.
Yeah. I like all the sentimental ones, like the one of, I don't know, there's one of like a snowman that I painted when I was, I don't know, like in 3rd grade or something. And then Melissa's usually like, that doesn't go with the scheme this year. And I'm like, oh. So I'm sad. And then she's happy because her, all of her colors are matched and coordinated.
Now, this was a point of contention last year. So I'm 32. So I'm at the age where like my mom's like a minimalist. She doesn't like keep really anything. I mean, she keeps some stuff, but she has started like giving me things from like my childhood. And the first time that she tried to do this, I was very offended because she gave me a bag full of like Christmas decorations that were like things that I had made.
You're like
as
kindergarten
a kid.
Rudolph.
Yeah. And I was like, Mom, why are you getting rid of these? And she was like, well, I mean, you made that when you were 5. Like, I don't need it on my tree anymore. Like and I was like, but what am I supposed to do with them? And she was like, well, you can put them on your tree. And I was like, well, I made them. I don't want them on my tree. Yeah, for you. Yeah. So it was this whole thing. So I'm curious to know, like, is it wrong for like parents to start like just pawning their stuff off on their kids? I don't know. How does that work?
So my parents gave us some like ornaments, not that we made, but they were like our ornaments when we were little. Like I have one that's like Dean's 3-year-old 1983.
Okay.
Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's cool, but the ones I made, I think they still keep them up there. Here's the trick, though: the ones the kids make are the ugliest ornaments in the entire
totally.
world.
It's part of why I didn't want it on my tree.
And they totally defile a tree. So there's just one.
Let's strategically place this in the back where no one can see it.
We had one Tommy made at his school in like preschool or something like that. It's him as an angel, and it is the ugliest ornament you've ever seen.
Sorry, Tommy.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna like send a package in the mail when he's married or has his own house or has his own apartment, whatever he does first. With his tree, and just be like, it was like some kind of fake letter, like, we've always waited for the day to give these to you.
Yeah, see, that happened to me, and I was very offended by it.
So I don't know. I'm debating whether or not to say this, but I think in the long view, it's actually very generous and kind of our parents to purge some of these things, because like ultimately they're saying like, hey, I don't really want this anymore. But at some point, either they can clean it out or we will have to clean it out. Like if
well, that's true.
And so true. Like,
thanks, morbid Alex.
I know it's really morbid.
Not for a while, Pat. Not for a while, Pat Scott.
I don't want her to go anywhere, but I just want her to like when she moved to Tallahassee, she was like, hey, I found this thing in your room from when you were 5. Do you want it? And I was like, I haven't thought about that thing in however many years since the last time I saw it. You can just get rid of it, and I promise I won't know. But like she brought me, like I had this stuffed Macho Man doll thing that I would wrestle when I was like 4, and she was like, I thought you might want this, and I was like, definitely not. So
Turn out of that, Mom.
We do. And Sarah's wanted.
So I threw it away, which was kind of like a controversial thing at the time. But anyways, so I don't know. I think it's sort of like in a really long view, it's an act of benevolence.
Well, I'm starting a support group. If you have ever been given sentimental things from your parents that you originally gave to them, you can call me and we will console each other.
We had a couple's like Christmas shower when we were engaged. And like they basically get ornaments because we got married right after Christmas and right around Christmas. And Chrissy's grandma gave us this like really nice Christmas book, like almost like a devotional or Advent thing or something. Mm-hmm. And we opened it up and it said, I guess she just didn't realize that she didn't get rid of this part. and it was like her grandma's name's Pat, and it was like to Pat, Merry Christmas, love Diane, 1974 or something like that.
She was passing on a family heirloom. All
Oh,
right. Well,
man. Good
that's
times.
enough of Christmas for now. And as you prepare to enjoy the season whenever you begin, know that you apparently don't have permission from 2 of the 3 people in
You do not.
the recording if you do it after Thanksgiving or before Thanksgiving.
Let's be super spiritual about this. Advent is the season of waiting in anticipation. So just hold your horses and wait until the Santa Claus comes down during the Macy's parade. And text me when it happens. I will not be watching.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Anywho. All right. Let's dive into the deep dive topic for today as we think about really how we think about the corporate gathering of the church and a worship service. And so I think the first question that I'll ask is, what is necessary in a worship service? So as we think about the church coming together weekly, to worship corporately, what is necessary in that hour and 15 minutes as we gather?
I mean, I know I'm a preacher, but preaching, I think that is like the central tenet of worship service. Like if I was not a pastor and was going to visit a church, before I looked at like what their order of service is or how what the music was like, what kind of songs we did, anything like that, I want to hear the sermon and hear what they preach. So I don't think you can have an actual Christian worship service without like opening the Word of God, like nights of worship, as like people like to call it. Especially like people, I'm old enough now where I go younger people like to call it. If
You're almost 40.
If they coming soon, and like by the time this is played, like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
If it's not a night of worship, in my opinion, if the scriptures are not read, and that's a kind of deal breaker for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, definitely preaching. I think prayer is important too, like just praying together. And praying, I mean, we can get it more into this in a minute, but praying, specifically, like taking certain forms of prayer. I mean, not necessarily like a specific written prayer, although that is good. But I mean, praying the scriptures, praying the things of the scriptures, confessing our sins to God, asking forgiveness, worshiping Him, kind of those different categories. Prayer is important. Obviously, music, praise, sing praise to God. Those are a couple other things.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of that. And then I would also add that I think that it's the place where the local churches, should practice, as we would say, the ordinances of the church. That's, baptism and the Lord's Supper. And so I think all of those are not necessarily have to be every time. Obviously, you can't manufacture baptisms, at least in a serious way. And then also, the Lord's Supper in terms of just taking that meal together corporately with the church, I think is an important thing.
Yeah, because the church comes together. That's what churches do, right? It's more than a gathering, but it's not less.
Mm-hmm.
So what is significant when we gather together that we do together? So I think that the word together, one another, like corporately, I think those are the important words. Like a Sunday morning service, and this is where church changed a lot over the last 25 years to the bad. And thankfully, churches are heading back in the other direction. But it almost became like your time with God, like very individual focused, very personal relationship focused, kind of like me, myself, and God time, where the church service is actually for us. It's the gathering. So I think what should we do when we come together? We sing together. We sing the good news. We hear together, and we take together. Right, the Lord's Supper. We pray together. We have God's ear together, and then we go together, right, into the week. So those are the things that are on my mind as we plan a service. Is what are we supposed to be doing together, like as a church? Like what are those important things? Yeah,
and I think too, I mean, in all of those aspects that we've talked about, preaching, singing, praying, taking the, practicing the ordinances of the church, all those things, there's a vertical relationship that we're kind of addressing. That's all of this is worship to God. Then there's, I think, some horizontal, aspect of that where, especially in singing, in taking the Lord's Supper together, in seeing a baptism and being reminded of kind of our own story for those of us who are in Christ. Like there is an aspect of when I may not want to sing the truths or hear the truths, just because of life circumstances, it may be hard for me to believe that like whatever we're singing is true. it's nice to be reminded by the church of these truths and have people sing vertically first, but also as a reminder to me that I can stand arm in arm with brothers and sisters and say, yeah, in Christ alone my hope is found. Even though I might be in a season where like it doesn't feel that way, there's encouragement that way. And then there's also, we're proclaiming that truth to hopefully an unbelieving world as people who aren't yet a part of God's family are joining the gathering of the church to see what it is that we believe and what we're proclaiming and what we're putting our hope and our trust in. And so it's like a sort of vertical, horizontal, and downward doesn't really feel right, but maybe outward, proclamation of those things. What is so preaching of the word, I think, needs to happen. Dean, I agree with, like, every time the church gathers corporately for worship. Are there other things that you would say we should do every time that we gather? And for maybe things that are, there's no clear command in the scriptures, how should we think about how often we should do some of those other things, like the Lord's Supper?
Gosh, I think there are things we can take from the scriptures and that are good to do and shared in corporate gatherings. And like you said, there's no, one clear-cut model for this is how the church now must do their services. But I do think that singing together, praying together, are both things that I think are important and are biblical and are also other means and expressions of the truth that, we're proclaiming and receiving through the teaching of the word. And so I think all three of those things are very good and necessary for discipling people in a corporate gathering. I don't know, honestly, like I don't know that I have an answer for, this is how often we should take the Lord's Supper. Obviously baptism is, whenever someone is ready to be baptized,
Let's go.
That's when we do it. We personally at City Church don't stick to, not personally at City Church, but we at City Church don't stick to, we don't say we're only going to baptize on the first Sunday of the month or whatever. We just kind of do it whenever someone's ready and whenever it works out, which has been encouraging the last, several Sundays. We've seen that. Not to be like, I guess I am speaking from kind of my own thoughts here, but I think it's good and helpful to take the Lord's Supper as much as possible, because I think anytime, I just think about the scriptures, like you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Like anytime that we have an opportunity to do that together and to be reminded just through that simple but really meaningful act of Christ's death for us on the cross and his resurrection. And I think that's good. I think it's good because it gives us a time. The way that we, take it and administer it here, we have a brief time of kind of silence and just thinking and praying, together, but silently to yourself for a few minutes. And I think that's good in people's weeks. I don't think that there is a lot of time that, we naturally take to just sort of reflect. And so I enjoy taking the Lord's Supper as much as possible, and I think it's good that we do that. But I'm just not studied in ecclesiology enough, and two, I don't know that that there is a prescription to say you should do this every Sunday. You have to do this every Sunday. I know lots of different churches do that differently, and especially in Baptist life, that looks totally different. But I do just think about the scriptures. For as often as you eat the bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And so I think when we can do that often, it's a good thing.
So if you're going to claim to be a gospel-centered church, which a lot of people like to claim, and you only take the Lord's Supper, like these kind of symbol and understanding of the gospel, and you only take the Lord's Supper every fifth Sunday or, twice a year or, on an occasional Sunday night or something like that. Like, can you really claim gospel-centeredness? I don't want to go too far on that because I think that starts in the pulpit, but is your service, really, like, if we just neglect that regularly, I don't want to say you can't claim it, but I think it's a fair question to go, hey, are we being maybe as gospel-centered as we could be? Like you said, we take this until we proclaim his death, the good news of the gospel until he comes. So the question, a couple of things you see pushback on the Lord's Supper conversation. The main one is it becomes routine. And I would push back. We don't want it to become routine. It's like, well, that is what Sunday morning is supposed to be for us. Like, routine's actually a good word in the Christian faith. We've made it into a bad word.
Yeah.
Like, it's a good word. So no one says that about music or the sermon. It's like, well, we have a sermon every week. Doesn't that kind of get routine? We sing songs every week, and it's kind of getting routine. We pray every week. People aren't saying those things. What is it about that, do you think, that makes people say that? Is it just the way they were raised? Is it just like they're not used to it being like, you're not going to hear an Anglican say that, because the Eucharist, as they call it, is a central part of their. It's like what preaching is for us.
Yeah,
right.
They usually have very short sermons, but that is like, that takes like a long. It's like a thing. I mean, they present it and they prepare it and they do all these things. Why do y'all think that maybe people think that's like kind of their almost default thing they point to, that it becomes routine in a negative way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, like, I grew up in the Presbyterian church that I grew up in. We took it, I don't remember exactly. I don't know if it was once a month, or I don't remember the exact frequency, but I think it was once a month, and it was like, it was a big deal, and the service was a little longer, and everybody was dressed a little nicer, especially the people like serving, and so I do think there was this. And I don't mean this negatively, pageantry that came with it.
That's definitely true in traditional Baptist churches. Holy cow.
And so in that regard, it's thought of like as, oh, it's a special Sunday because we're taking the Lord's Supper. Like, it's almost more, there's more reverence. There's more, I don't know, just there's more like kind of going into it than just a normal Sunday. And so I think some of that is like, growing up, I just didn't see the Lord's Supper as normal, in the sense that, like, it was a regular thing to be practiced, at some kind of higher frequency than we did. And so I think if you grew up in a tradition where, I think we did once a month. So if you grow up in a tradition that does it even less than that, and then it really becomes a thing, there is sort of this like, oh, this is a really special moment. I don't understand how we're doing this special moment over and over and over again. And I think some of it too, maybe just it's not like taught on as why we would do it more frequently. I don't know, Ashley, if you have any thoughts on that, but that's kind of my gut reaction.
That the not explaining or never being taught why, or the meaning behind it, or and I don't want to say that if you are someone who thinks that it's routine, that like no pastor or person in a church ever, I don't want to put that on like the church's side, that somebody never attempted to explain what the Lord's Supper is, but somewhere along the way there was a disconnect, or you didn't grow up in that tradition, understanding why it is a central part to the service. When we went to church as a kid, so I didn't grow up going to church regularly, and when we went, it was most of the time a non-denominational church, and so there wasn't, the first time that I ever went to anything besides a non-denom or a Baptist church was when I was probably towards the end of high school, and I went to an Episcopal church to a service. And that's obviously, very different, follows a very different flow, so to speak. And so I don't have a good answer other than I can imagine that, I remember taking the Lord's Supper, but it very much was just, okay, this is the next thing we do in the service. And so I don't remember ever being, or ever learning, I should say, the real significance of practicing it together and why we should do it frequently. So that would just be my best guess, is that people maybe don't understand, and maybe certain congregations just, don't put as much emphasis on it. And it's not, I'm not saying that, a Baptist church can't take the Lord's Supper seriously. We obviously do, but I mean, even over time, we've had conversations about how we take the Lord's Supper, and we've sort of changed that format, and we've evaluated those things. And so it's even been an evolving process for us. And so, yeah, I can understand why someone who is unchurched or dechurched or whatever would say, gosh, that just is a routine, kind of empty moment for me in the service. But that's not saying something about the Lord's Supper. That's obviously there's heart issues there. And by issues, I just mean like, it depends on where a person is in their faith and in their understanding of that ordinance and why it's meaningful. So I think it is good that we explain and that we really emphasize on the front end. We set up the Lord's Supper, so to speak, in a way that hopefully clearly communicates to people why we practice that. So
yeah, and Dean, one other thought as you were talking, Ashlyn, that made me think about it was, I grew up going to a summer camp, and there was some night of the week that they would take the Lord's Supper, and it was way more like emotionally involved. And so I think maybe that might be part of it too, that people expect this big kind of like lots of music and reflection and, kind of to make, I don't want to say make a production out of the Lord's Supper, but in a sense, there's just like this, it's just approached differently. And so I don't know if people are kind of like, oh, they're just doing it in the service and talking about it and passing out the elements and taking it, like, it just feels less.
Well, I would wonder too, if for a lot of people, is it not intentionally? Again, I don't want to immediately like blame a ministry staff or whatever, pastor or planning team or whatever for this, but for a lot of people in the congregation, like, is it sometimes separated from the scriptures for you? So I know sometimes growing up, I would think, the Lord's Supper, sort of to your point, Alex, about like there being a little bit of pageantry or this, it was sort of, even if it actually did feel like a reverent, important moment or part in the service, it was more like, I need to act really proper right now. You know what I mean? As opposed to looking at that it is a reverent moment, but not in the way that we sometimes, sort of try to manufacture it, like when you walk into a church and all of a sudden you act different, there's some of that aura, I think, sometimes around the Lord's Supper. And at least there was for me growing up. And so, of course, that's completely disconnected from the scriptures. And so again, there's just not this true, correct understanding of what it is and why it matters, which is important for us as churches to try to educate on that.
Yeah, that's good. So as we just to keep moving and talk about other aspects of the service, how important should, service style be when, let's say, somebody moves to a new town and they're looking for a church and they come, let's say they're coming from City Church. We have contemporary, in the sense that like that's what people thought of it as 10 years ago. Now it's just normal kind of, rock band, modern worship. And they go to a town, like how important should style and type of worship service be when looking for a church?
I think as long as we don't over spiritualize it and just acknowledge it's more of a preference type of thing, then it's fine. I think the problem is when we say, well, I can't worship God unless, like, nowhere, the only thing in the Bible that keeps you from worshiping God is sin. Okay. It's not style. We've made that stuff up. I just can't worship to that. I just can't, like, that's not actually a bad category in the Bible. Like that whole idea is something that like kind of Western church created. So it's just a preference thing. Like, to me, like, it just doesn't matter to me that much. I just want not to be distracting in terms of like it being so bad that I almost like contradicting myself here. Not that you can't worship to it, because I don't think that's a real thing. But you're just like, oh my gosh, get me out of here! Like this is brutal.
Yeah. Like the quality is a barrier to engaging.
Or just like the overall, just surviving for the whole thing. But yeah. So we have a very definitely like clear style here that we do the modern church. But if we change it tomorrow, I'm just gonna be really honest. It wouldn't matter to me very much as long as it was done well with the right heart, with Christ-centered lyrics. It just really wouldn't matter to me. I could go to a pipe organ church, and if we're singing the gospel and we're and the words being preached and people are actually singing congregationally, that's really important too. I think that could be an issue. If it's any kind, if it's just like a choir led, or if it's a praise team with a lot of soul, or if it's a band, can people sing along to it? Like, is it congregational friendly? So that's really what comes down to me. Really, I think it's totally fine. You go do whatever you want to do in terms of what kind of church you choose, as long as you have the mindset that it's preference. It's not a spiritual thing when it comes to style.
Yeah, that's good. So one of the things that is, and this is sort of tied to the idea of style, but that is central to a worship service, and kind of always has been, is music. And so how important is I think there are different opinions on this, where it's like, okay, anything that's Christian is God's music, and He can use it for His glory and His good, and as long as the pastor is preaching a gospel-centered message, like, I don't want to say the music doesn't matter, but like we can sing anything. And then there are other times, and we are in this camp, there are certain songs from certain churches or certain bands that we don't want to sing. How should churches think about that, and how should people maybe in the church think about what it is that they're singing.
Yeah, I think that's good. Well, I think we should always be discerning, and our measure for that is the scriptures. And so if we're singing something that is not biblical, counter to what the Bible says, or even maybe well-meaning but actually unhelpful, unclear. I think clarity is good in the context of a service because we're really not together for that long. There are some songs that I guess would classify. That's the other thing too, is like, I like music, but I'm not like, I don't know all the different categories and stuff like that. So there are some songs that probably would classify as, I guess, worship music that I would listen to and really enjoy and that do bless me, that would probably be unhelpful in the context of a worship service because, one, they don't lend towards corporate worship, and they're probably a little more expressive and less clear in meaning. And like, I'm not trying to, this could get a little messy, but like I can listen with a discerning ear and understand, okay, this is a song that I do genuinely think is written for the worship of God by someone who wants to glorify God with their musical talents, but it doesn't fit necessarily in the context of a corporate worship service, at least not here. So I think we can live like in those categories, but I do think we need to be discerning. So yeah, I mean, I would say, of course, if you're singing something in a service that, it isn't talking about sin and repentance and forgiveness and atonement and the gospel and all of these things, the coming of Christ, the glory of God. And that's the thing, is that at the sort of root of all of this, we were trying to point and orient our hearts to God and to glorify him. And so if the song doesn't lead to that end, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good song, or that you should never listen to it, but it's probably not best fit for a worship service. And that's okay. We probably sing more songs than many other churches, and we sing 4 or 5, in a service. And so it's okay. We're only talking about 3 or 4 songs. So yeah, I would say it is important to be discerning. And if you're trying to pick those 3 or 4 songs, and I'm not our music director, so I'm not thinking about this in as critically of a way as Todd is, but then it doesn't really make sense to say, well, this song is like pretty good. And some people might be a little confused, but like, man, it's got, a great like musical piece to it, like the guitar sounds really awesome. And that's probably a less discerning way to choose a song than, man, this song, the focus as we sing this is going to be, in unison, lifting our voices to glorify God. And this song is going to help us do that. And it's an expression of God's glory and God's goodness. That I think would be a different way and a better way of thinking about it. So I don't even know if that answers your question, but yeah. I would say I do think that we can like sometimes like be, you don't want to be like legalistic about it. Like at the end of the day, like music is expression. Like I want people to feel something when they're singing, So we have to be, I don't know. I think sometimes we can get like a little weird about that stuff, but it absolutely should be clear in talking about who God is, what he has done for us in Christ, and pointing our hearts toward that. And again, at the end of the day, we're probably talking about 3, 4, 5 songs. So the scriptures are always a good place to look to make sure, okay, are we in line with what we want people to be, actually singing and thinking?
Yeah, for me, I think the music is in a way can be its own like second sermon. Mm-hmm. People are looking at the words, what they're on the screen, they're saying them out loud. It really can be a shaping time, not just like a praise time, but a shaping time. Like I think discipleship can happen. Mm-hmm. I think evangelism can happen. During church music.
Absolutely.
And expression, I think that's all fantastic. And I think kind of the point I was making about the preference issue was that people were able to feel and express themselves. And I think sometimes in some kind of modern church band circles, they maybe lose sight of this, that people were able to do that long before contemporary Christian music was invented. Mm-hmm. Right? Because Christians have been worshiping in church services for a very, very, very long time. Before all of a sudden we took out acoustic guitars and electric guitars, and so I think it's just really important to remember that. So it's not our style that does that, hopefully it's just music. It's what God does with music and has forever, right? We see it throughout the Psalms. Like we see how music has an effect on people, right? So also, you asked about the like kind of what songs we don't want to do outside of songs that just really are there's really no point to them. I mean, like, it's like, what are we singing? Like, and those, I don't want to get into what those are and be mean, but like, but I think there's enough good stuff out there and being written. And by that, I mean content, singability, to have to sing songs from churches that are prosperity gospel churches.
Mm-hmm.
I just think there's enough stuff out there, because nowadays a lot of people, how they get exposed to those churches is through their music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And before you know it, they're listening to the pastor on a podcast, and they haven't been discipled enough to have a discernment of what's legit and what's not. So that's all it is for me. Is there's enough, like, our church is not suffering or being like because we're not doing these songs from these 2 or 3 churches.
Yeah,
it's just there's enough great stuff out there. And also so much of this stuff today is just written for the radio. Rather than for churches, even though it's church bands that are writing it, it's written for radio and Spotify,
Mm-hmm.
So I think you got to be careful. So of course people sing it that know the song really well, because they listen to a lot to Way FM all day or whatever it might be. But we have to be really careful, like, what songs actually are singable. What really are songs that the congregation is not going to by default just watch the band. In a concert kind of setting, it's easy for modern churches like ours to get viewed as get accused of being a concert, like in a derogatory way. But sometimes that's fair if the songs you pick out just cause people to look and just cause people to watch, and it's more about the ditties that the singers are doing and the ditties the guitar player's doing and those kind of things than it's more about atmosphere and that kind of stuff than actually is the content of the music, which is something just every church has to be careful of.
Yeah. I mean, I think, oftentimes the sermon is going to be the main avenue of discipleship in the gathering of the church, worship hour. But oftentimes what we sing will stick. And so if you're not, and I think, Ashlyn, you made a great point about like using discernment and making sure that we have great clarity and particular emphasis on what we're singing, because oftentimes it's the song, or the chorus that somebody's going to remember in a time of joy or trial more so than a line from a sermon, just oftentimes.
Definitely.
And so, theology sung, and I feel like I heard somebody say this, but so I don't know who it was. So if I'm stealing it from somebody, sorry, but like theology that's sung is theology that sticks. And because you just internalize music in a different way. And so there's a tremendous opportunity and responsibility to teach our people and to shepherd our people, and to really take people through songs that express all sorts of emotions. They're not just happy, they're not just reflective, they're not just somber, but to use the whole kind of emotional range and experience to express our affection and our praises and our longings for things to be made right through the Lord in our time together.
Well, I would add, are they distinctly Christian?
Right.
And by that, I don't mean like, of course they're all sung at churches, but could they be sung somewhere else?
Yeah.
Like, could they make it on a secular radio? Could they, could someone who's just like a generic theist sing this song, or a New Age person, or Oprah's Book Club, or, whatever it might be, rather than singing Christ, our hope in life and death,
right.
like we sing on Sunday mornings, those type of things.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Rather than I will rise above the waves or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not sure if this is The Climb by Miley Cyrus or something.
Great comparison.
or something vaguely spiritual. Why, so as we plan our services, we think about kind of, the way that the elements of, our liturgy, so to speak, kind of interact with one another and in the flow of our service, and how we put something where, and every church is a little bit different, in regards to this. But why does the flow of a service matter? Like, why are we thoughtful about those things?
Well, I think kind of using what we just talked about as a springboard, when we're trying to lead people in worship, we're trying to bring, we want our souls to be aligned to and pointed to the glory of God in worship. And so if we're, giving special attention to the music, but ignoring, prayer, or if we're, if we're putting more emphasis maybe on feeling and emotion, but not on what are the thoughts that people are actually going to be thinking. Like those things all need to fit together. And I think sometimes that's why it's easy to get like locked into like one specific aspect or characteristic of a service or of worship, because we don't think about it like holistically, but as we're singing, we're also thinking, because we're taking in words, we're dwelling on the meaning as we're listening to the sermon. Hopefully I would encourage someone from the minute you walk in, for us at the auditorium, or the sanctuary, or whatever the room is that you worship in with your church,
space.
The gathering space. There
the
you
cafeteria.
go. Yeah, whatever. Outside right now,
Yep.
your living room.
Yep.
Not sure.
Under the tent.
Yeah, anywhere. I would sort of try to flip the switch on in your brain and think, okay, for the next 60 minutes or however long your service is, I'm just going to kind of think and try to see if I notice any connection points throughout this service. And I think that often you will find moving kind of from song to song and then into the sermon and then the prayer. Like there are hopefully, I don't mean transitions literal as like, the service host is like, now we're going to do this, but hopefully you're sort of seeing how things weave in and out of each other. And there's some kind of collective message. And hopefully that is lifting up, the glory of God and holding the gospel central. And so I think that's why it's important to be intentional in how those things can all fit together, because the whole time we're worshiping God. We're trying to orient our hearts to Him, and that has to come through every piece of the worship service. And it in each way is a way that we are able to experience the goodness of God together, and sort of open ourselves up in that time to Him. And so I don't know, what was your original question? I'm just talking.
Service
flow. Oh yeah. So I think that's why it's important for those things to fit together, because one, we're sort of teaching people, here are different aspects of worship: prayer, singing, teaching, reading, whatever, confessing sin. And then in a practical sense, I think it's good to be intentional about those things, because you are kind of leading people through the hour, and so it would, I don't know that it would necessarily be, I don't think it would be sinful for us to say, we're going to sing a song, then we're going to have the sermon, then we're going to have a baptism, then we're going to sing another song. Like their churches do that differently, from denomination to denomination. Even within Baptist churches, there's certainly lots of difference in how things are structured. But I think it's helpful in the way that, and especially if you, think creatively, or if you're in, certain, like if you're, I don't know, a storyteller, or if you're, in certain different spheres or ways of thinking, it's nice to be able to sort of think along a certain trajectory to kind of weave people through as you're sort of telling the story of the gospel in a Sunday gathering.
Yeah, and I mean, I think too, the other thought is that and Ashley, you mentioned, like, as you're kind of coming into the space, wherever you are going to gather with your church, like there is something different that happens in the hour gathered together, and that it does take some preparation, in the sense that, I mean, like on an ideal morning, I've read the scriptures before I've gathered with the church, so my mind and my heart is already oriented towards the Lord and towards what He's doing in my own life and in the lives of those around me, and just I'm thankful for the gospel. But it's not always, oftentimes as you come into a service, like you're running 5 minutes late, you forgot your mask, you had to run back for that, you are now have to drop the kids off, and then, you're coming in and there's like this hurry, and it takes a second to sort of like orient ourselves, even, in the best of intentions, to what we're doing. And so I think sometimes, like, I mean, that's one of the things that I think about, just like how all of what we do sort of before the sermon is preparing us and preparing our hearts and our minds to really receive the Word of God, in the sense that, like, it allows us to be, like, our affections to be stirred, if we see baptism, to be reminded that God has in my own life worked through, saving me through Christ, and is doing that in other people, that we have the opportunity to respond with generosity and give to the mission of His church, and then to open the scriptures together as a church and to hear them, preached, and to be reminded of His goodness and His truth, and then on the back end of that to respond, whether that's through the Lord's Supper and through, singing and whatever other elements might take place, prayer or a confession or a creed or something like that. All of those things should hopefully kind of lead us to a point where we have the opportunity to come to the Word with kind of open hearts and open minds, and out of kind of serving out of gratitude, and then as we prepare to be sent back into the world to for the whatever however many hours there are in a week, to live on mission, to be sort of to have our cup filled. And I don't mean that in like an emotional sense where we walk out on a like, oh man, that was amazing. I have this emotional high. Not that that's bad, but that like our gospel cup is filled, and we're reminded of the body of believers that we get to live on mission with in this city. And so thinking about how you place certain things really around, I think this to me, and Dean, you said this first, like the preaching is the central element of the service. Not that it can't be the last thing or it has to be the thing in the middle or whatever, but how does everything fit around what we're trying to do with presenting and reminding and preaching the gospel?
Yeah, like there shouldn't be hey, we need to be less of a sermon today so we can sing an extra song. And by central, we don't mean that anything else is unimportant. We just means that instead of it's not that it's unimportant. There's a order of importance. So it'd be we're doing one less song because we need more time for the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's really critical. And so, but also we care about flow because we're intentional.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not just doing this to do this. It's not just like, oh, let's pull up a service, let's sing some songs. I mean, Todd, our worship leader, Gianna, they spend time thinking through these things, like the songs we're going to sing. Like they actually think through this stuff. They even educate the band on why we're singing these songs. The prayers we pray, they're written carefully because we want to be very in sync with other things that are going on in our service, things that are going on in our culture that we need to be praying for as a church, things such as that. So we try to be intentional with everything we do.
That leads to another question that I wanted to talk about, and we have something that we at least use internally called the double promise, and that really, that relates to everything that we do as a church, but I think it probably started with the gathering. Dean, can you kind of maybe tell us what that is, and then why that even early on as a church plant, and as we've continued to grow and continue to reach people and continue as a church, why that continues to be an important thing for us?
Yeah, I just know that in ours very just cynical, no second chances, no assume the best culture that we're in, that people are going to give you one shot. So if somebody invites their friend, it means they've probably invited their friend for 2 years. They've been praying for them. It takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So people are not going to invite someone to a church they secretly aren't excited about themselves. So when we think like, oh, if a church just says, oh, if we just change our music, or oh, if we just get a pastor who's cooler, or if we just do this, then people are going to come to church. Like, why would a person who's not a believer come to church, period? People who aren't believers aren't coming to church anymore, or who are believers aren't coming to church anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Why would someone who isn't it's just not on their radar. So I want to give our folks what I call the double promise. It's an internal thing in my head when it comes to how I evaluate our church, when it comes to Sunday morning. And I want this to be the same as Tuesday night for college and Wednesday night for youth and our children's ministry and our small groups and everything. And that double promise is we promise you that you have to give no disclaimer on the way there. Mm-hmm. We're like, hey, just so you know, he's really insensitive about, name that race and makes jokes about them. But he means well. Just so you know, he makes snide comments about this, or, things like he cusses sometimes or, something along. I know your kids are coming, or, no disclaimers on the way there. And then no apologies on the way home. I don't want someone to go, I am so sorry. He has never endorsed a candidate from stage before. He has never made that kind of comment about his wife, or like that's just so unlike him. That kind of thing. I want our folks to have full confidence knowing there's no disclaimer on the way there. Outside of maybe like, hey, we're doing a series on marriage, or that's more of like a, hey, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Or no apology on the way home. Have we messed that up before? Yes. Mm-hmm. And I always feel the worst when we do. And a lot of times when we mess stuff up, it's just not clearly thinking through things, or wrongly assuming that this is going to work. When you lean towards pragmatism as your motivation for doing things, rather than the scriptures and what the church has been doing for a long time, there's a tendency to mess up there. Mm-hmm. So I just want our folks to, in the early days, we want our service, we want people to have confidence in their church. I wanted to create a church where people want to bring their friends, mm-hmm. and they're not going to bring their friends or family if they have those doubts about their church and inviting a guest.
Yeah. And I think that's a reason why we've held excellence in view of everything that we do.
Definitely.
Not perfection, but yeah, we don't want to be like, oh yeah, the microphone always goes out in the middle of the sermon and it's kind of weird for 20 minutes and it'll be fine. But
there's this lady that sings and she's horrible, but it's the pastor's, sister or something like that. I just want to let you know she's really bad.
Yeah. No, I just think that's been such a defining characteristic of how we think about just the gathering and the opportunity that we have, that people have entrusted us with. Like, they've said, hey, you know what, I'm going to bring my friend because either they're de-churched or unchurched, and I'm going to trust my church with their care, and we just want to take that really seriously. Dean, one other question for you, and then Ashlyn, you've had the opportunity to watch this from afar, so I'm just curious. One of the things I think in a lot of churches where there can be tension in relationship is between, and this is not true in our church, but between the lead pastor and the, worship pastor or music director or whatever that title is, the person who's kind of in charge of oftentimes thinking about and developing the liturgy. Dean, maybe speak specifically to lead pastors, as you are one. What are ways that you can develop that relationship and nurture that relationship? Because you and Todd have a fantastic relationship, working and otherwise, but that's often not the case. And so I'd love for you to talk to that, and then Ashlyn, maybe just thoughts that you have as you've watched that develop from afar.
I don't think there's anything wrong. Sometimes it's a necessity to kind of do like a plug and play kind of thing, where as a church you have someone who's kind of come in that is maybe you pay his gas money to come, and he comes and lead. His job is like, man, have 4 songs that are centered on Jesus, and we trust you, and don't be a fool in the community, and if you can do 2 weeks a month, that'd be great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's called like a new church, right? or a church that can't afford this. There aren't rules about this, right. Okay? However, for longevity and really long-term faithfulness and discipleship and the direction you're trying to take a people, besides just an hour of we're just doing this routine and going home, is I think that relationship of having that longevity connection, long-term connection between a pastor and a worship leader who see themselves as teammates doing this together, a partnership, I think is really important. And Todd and I respect each other. The biggest thing for me is I trust him. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't have to ever, I've been places before where it's been just like so all over the place and not making sense that in my mind I've been like, I have to go save this. And that's not the best thought. I know Jesus saves. I'm not talking about me. So I'm not talking about saving souls. But the pressure is on me to like go knock it out of the park to save this worship service. I've had to feel that way before. I never had to feel that way with Todd. I never had to feel that way with Gianna. I trust them. So also I want them to trust me and know that I'm for them, and I believe in what they're doing, and I value what they bring to our church. So I think the relationship is important because of the trust factor, especially. Like, I don't have to go sweating what songs Todd's going to pick out. I know I don't have to go apologize to anybody or clarify anything and go, oh, y'all, I know we did that song, and we don't really believe that. I don't have to worry about that with them, and I know they're going to have my back too. Like, they get the significance of preaching. They don't see, what's that t-shirt that marching bands in high school make in between the, before and after the halftime show, there'll be a football game played. That's not how. Gosh, don't get me started. But know your role, and that's kind of true though. They don't see it as me just like when I go up there to preach, just like taking up some time before the worship set begins again. They see it as like part of the central part of the worship service as well. Like, they're contributing to that. We're responding to the word when we sing after the sermon. We're preparing for the word when we sing before the sermon. We're preparing for the Lord's Supper, responding to the Lord's Supper, all those things. I just think it really matters. You should nurture it. And that if you can have like a team that grows together and develops together and goes through the long haul together and bears each other's burdens together and gets frustrated with each other sometimes and all the above, and it's done in a healthy way that's about a sisterhood or brotherhood, I think it's really great for the church.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I just like from observation and just sitting in like our service planning meetings, I would say that the communication piece is really important in the sense of like those two roles communicating with one another, and whatever makeup of your ministry staff plans a service, the more that you can communicate and get in the same room and talk things through, I think is really important, because that does, to me, help avoid those issues of, the pastor gets up and preaches on this one passage and it's totally disconnected from what we're singing, or or maybe all of the songs flow and sort of tell a story, but then the message is, and I'm not even talking about like something heretical, but just, there's just major disconnects, or you can tell that there's not collaboration, or there's not trust, or one group is trying to outdo each other. Gosh, I hope, if any of those kinds of things are present, those are major issues that have to be worked out. But I think that collaboration and that, as Dean mentioned, it seems like that growing together piece is really important, because there have been times in our service planning where we've had to evaluate things and had to say, hey, this is an area where we need to grow, or we need to improve, or we need to be more intentional or more focused, or we need to get ahead on this, or, there's all of those things that we're constantly evaluating and trying to do better, not for the purpose of having a more quote unquote polished service where we can say yay us, but for the purpose of leading people in God glorifying worship, and minimizing distractions, and just really asking the Lord, what do these gatherings need to look like? And so I think the more that can happen, it seems to me like a worship leader, a worship pastor, and a senior pastor have to have a great relationship and work together, because they're also both shepherding people, and so that's important too, to be in unison on that, to be able to reflect the values and the teaching of the church in common ways that fit together and that are helpful for the service. So.
Yeah. And when you're and also just be aware, like when you're singing, you're kind of putting yourself out there, using your talent. There's it's going to be kind of a vulnerable thing. Most people in this world can't sing very well. So this might sound strange, but I also want John and Todd to be well aware that I'm their biggest fan, and they know that. They know that I'm their biggest fan. Not like in a showy way, but just in a value what they do. And I think we have more singers than just them. I'm well aware of that. But they're they're like the people who've been singing the longest of the church, who are the most frequent up there. Those two. I'm their biggest supporter in the world, and they know that. And I just think that's really important. And I also know that when it comes to my preaching, that they're going to defend me if they need to. They're going to stand. They might not agree with everything I say, but they're going to stand by me. And they're there's that trust is just built in. And I think that's really important for that role, especially.
That's really good. One final question before we head to the local on tap. Do you guys have any resources or things that you would point people to if they're listening and just haven't thought about the corporate gathering in this way, or certain things that we've talked about? Any resources that you would point people towards that could be helpful for continued learning on the idea of the corporate gathering outside of the Bible?
I was going to say, am I allowed to say the Bible? I know that there's so many. I don't read a lot of books or resources on the practical aspects of worship service planning. That's just not something organizationally that's in my area. So I really am not the best trusted source on that. But Alex, I know you could speak to that. So I'm sure that I can think of great articles that I've read and things like that, but I'm probably not the best source for that, other than just, actually looking at the scriptures and, working that in.
I think it'd be helpful to read Jared Wilson's Gospel Centered Church and also his Prodigal Church. Both those books, Sometimes What We Shouldn't Do, helps us to understand what we should do. And then also watch a City Church worship service online.
There you go.
And ask us some questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say, those are all great recommendations. The one that comes to mind for me is Rhythms of Grace by Mike Cosper.
I thought about that,
which is a really good book. And then Christ-Centered Worship by Brian Chappell. I never know if it's Chappell or Chappell.
Brian Chappell.
Brian Chappell is another really good resource. And then obviously Desiring God and the Gospel Coalition have multiple articles and stuff that I would trust so check that out if you have thoughts, and like Dean said, ask us questions. All right, we will head back to our theme of the holidays, given that it's November and Christmas is around the corner, and I just like to stir the pot.
My word.
All right, it's
not even Veterans Day yet.
What is your favorite holiday tradition? We can go Thanksgiving or Christmas or anything in between or in before or whatever in Tallahassee.
Is yours the Lions being carried by local cable?
It's close. It's definitely up there on Thanksgiving Day. Yeah. I love getting depressed at 3:00 in the afternoon after we've lost again. So it's my favorite tradition.
At least you can pass out in a food coma and sleep it away.
Yeah. Usually I'm pissed and then I go fried turkey. So whatever, it works out.
I'm going to go with City Church Christmas Eve service.
Okay.
followed by a lot of family and like some close friends will stop by our house afterwards for Kush's jambalaya on Christmas Eve. That would usually be my number 2, because my number 1 would be Christmas on the Moon with my pasta visual. The only time I go to Olive Garden once a year, I go by myself and go because it's right across the street from the Moon. Those listening that don't know about Tallahassee. And I go sit there. I have the NFL playoff game on in the background, or actually towards kind of end of regular season. Yeah,
like that'd be like week 12.
Yeah, like game close, like usually an important time of year NFL on in the background. I eat like 57 breadsticks, pasta visual. I go once a year, and then I go preach at the Moon with like full energy ready to party. And that would be the first one, was that service, Christmas on the Moon.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be back 2021.
Yeah, so we're not doing it this year. That's why I didn't name it. Thanks to our homie COVID.
That's fair. Ashlyn?
I do love our Christmas Eve service, so that's definitely a good tradition. I usually either like Christmas Eve night or Christmas morning, my sister and I will spend some time together, like just the two of us. So she'll come over and either like we'll spend the night together, or we'll get together in the morning and like watch a Christmas movie, or it depends kind of year to year what that looks like. So that's always a fun tradition. And then like in terms of just like a festive holiday, like, you know, experience Christmas in Tallahassee or something like that. Every year, I love Christmas lights. It's fun to go look at Christmas lights. So I will go and get my one seasonal caramel apple spice from Starbucks, because if you have more than one, you need to go to the dentist immediately. It's like straight syrup and apple juice.
And you might have diabetes.
Yeah. You can feel it coming.
Thank you for supporting local business, though. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, so I'll go with, you know, friends or whoever and we'll go by Starbucks, get my caramel apple spice, drive around, look at Christmas lights, and that's it. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. My, since you know, I was not thinking about this in like any real spiritual sense. I was just, you know, so like city church services weren't on my mind when I thought about the question, which I don't know.
Sorry. Just love the Lord.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I don't know what that says about me, but, I will say, like, every Christmas day that we're in Tallahassee, which sometimes we'll go somewhere Christmas Day, like we'll go visit Melissa's family or whatever. But if we're here on Christmas Day, like that night after dinner, we will go walk the Dorothy B. Oven Park and look at the lights and just kind of soak it all in one more time and enjoy the day. So that's my kind of, it's a good nightcap at the end of Christmas.
Do you guys go to Dorothy Oven after Christmas Day?
Maybe once or twice. Usually I'm not here.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe once or so.
I feel like I never go after Christmas. So
and everybody, curious. We are now during Christmas season we go like almost every night. So if they shut it down because of COVID, I'm gonna go fight the city commission. So y'all be ready at that meeting. But we're talking all this Christmas stuff, and it's still a month out from Christmas when you hear this Christmas season, I should say. We just want to help you anticipate. Just kind of get the Christmas juices flowing.
Put the fireplace on the TV.
Producer,
turn on some music.
Producer Jacob told me his favorite holiday tradition is going by himself to the Nutcracker Ballet every year. I thought that was sweet.
Nice. That
So
is.
thoughtful.
It's a good production.
I thought that was sweet.
Well, as we wrap this episode up on that note, we are grateful that you are listening, and we hope that if you haven't already, we'd love for you to share this podcast with anybody that you think might enjoy it. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, all that good stuff. And we will see you next week for another episode of The Local Dive.
Thanks for listening to The Local Dive, a podcast diving into deep and shallow musings about Christ, the church, and culture. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow The Local Dive on social media and continue the conversation with us on Instagram and Twitter at The Local Dive Pod.